Coming up tonight on the show, just 4 days away from the first round of the NFL draft, things are getting to that point where we just want the draft to be here, right? So much buzz, so many rumors, so much smoke. We want to see the fire. We don't want the sizzle anymore. We want the steak. But we have 4 days to get there. So tonight, some more sizzle for you. Ryan and Bryce from the HawksZone Rundown Podcast, a podcast that if you haven't watched it yet, you should be watching it. And hopefully after tonight, you'll see why. Great conversation with these guys about the draft, some of their guys they would pound the table for, what they think the Seahawks will do, what they should do about the quarterback position. And within that conversation, I'll tell you how my mind has changed a little bit about what I think the acquisition of Sam Howell means to this roster and how it might impact the quarterback position in the draft this week. And then we wrap it all up with a live Seahawks mock draft, lots of trades, lots of discussion, and a final board that we all really like. Stick around for that. Bryce and Ryan from the HawksZone Rundown Podcast coming up today on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Hit that like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and hit the bell so you're always notified of future episodes. You can subscribe to any audio platform that you prefer to hear the audio versions. But if you want to hear them without ads, you can do so on Spotify for a small monthly fee. That link will be in the description, as is the one for Buy Me a Coffee. You can do that, or a beer if you want to support the show, or hit that super thanks button down below if you want to contribute as well. This is kind of a long one. Want to get right into it. Let's not waste any more time. Bryce and Ryan from HawksZone Rundown Podcast talking draft. Here we go. All right, so I have been on their show, the HawksZone Rundown Podcast, which you all need to subscribe to, follow, listen, promote, get into. Time to have them back on Seahawks Forever now. Bryce and Ryan from the HawksZone. How you guys doing?
Great, Dan. Appreciate you having us on here.
Yeah, Dan, thanks a lot.
So we were chopping it up a little bit before I hit record and getting into it. So we just that happens sometimes, right? When you're setting up for a show and you get into some good stuff, and then you go, wait, let's save it. Let's save it for the podcast. We are 4 days away from the start of the NFL draft, the first round on Thursday night from Detroit. And the Seahawks, of course, have the 16th pick in the draft. I know you guys are like me. You have run through this over and over. You've looked at every scenario. You've done 1,000 million mock drafts. Bryce, as you sit here today, I'll start with you. Where do you sit on kind of what you want them to do versus what you think they will do?
So for me, Dan, I want them to trade back. And we've talked about this. Like that for me, based on what capital and based where they are right now with what they're doing as a franchise, I see this as a 2 or 3 year plan. So get some capital, be able to make some, maneuvers if you want. But I really think it depends on how this board falls. If there's a blue chip defensive player for Mike McDonald that's going to be a weapon and versatile, I think there's a good chance they stick and pick there at 16. I don't think, if like a Jared Verse or Cooper DeJean or one of these guys like that is sitting there and they've somehow fallen. I don't see a way that they pass that up, because there's no way if they trade back any farther, that guy's going to be there. So that's what I think is going to inevitably end up happening.
Now, do you think that's realistic? Because there's this perception that Schneider loves to accumulate extra picks, loves to trade down. He's averaged 9.5 picks per draft as a GM, never less than 8. I don't think, if you take away the 2021 draft, the COVID draft. And saw a stat today that between 2014, 2019, traded down in the first round 6 times. Since then, 0, nada, hasn't traded down in the draft the last 4 years. So, as you study this draft board, like, do you think that's what matches up? Do you think that's what makes sense? Or does getting a blue chip player at 16 maybe a little more realistic?
I think the more realistic thing is, depending on obviously how the quarterbacks go in the first bit of that draft, if that pushes some of that blue chip talent down, which it very well might, I think it could be realistic that they do actually stick and pick there, because this team isn't a Super Bowl caliber team yet. They're still a few pieces away. But if you can get a guy that like I said, Verse or DeJean, that's going to really impact you, come in and potentially be like a Witherspoon impact that he was last year. I don't know how John Schneider passes that up. Like that's going to be hard to sell the fan base on, and even sell your new head coach. Like if there's a guy that Mike Macdonald wants and he's banging the table for, like at 16, you kind of got to go in and get him.
Ryan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I agree to the point that if you see a blue chip guy at 16, the only thing I see is that we got such a massive gap between 16 and 81, and I think that's going to be a thing for John, and not only that, plus the history of him always trading back. I agree with Bryce. I'd like to see them trade back and accumulate picks, get in that meat of the draft. Get back in the second round, and just get a few more picks because obviously they're not sitting with many right now. But I agree. Like what I want them to do, like I want another impact guy for Mike, and like Bryce touched on, you got that generational pick last season. And you went after Devin Witherspoon, who obviously we all absolutely love. Just the mentality alone of that guy. And I'm high on DeJean. Like I love that kid. Now, if we trade back, it's going to be tough getting the late first. So I'm torn, man, because I'm like, I really like. I want to see them get somebody who can just come in and be another impact guy. Like DeJean, obviously you can. He's a chess piece for Mike Macdonald. Obviously, play corner, but can play safety, and I'm sure Mike would love a guy like that. So for me, I want to see them just go impact guy. But I also, just because of that gap, realistically, I mean, I see them. I think I see them trading it.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because we have a little bit of PTSD maybe from a couple years where they did trade back, and then we saw guys that we really liked get sniped. Mm-hmm. And I was just typing it in here. I wanted to go back to the LJ Collier draft because that's the one that stands out to me. When you look at how that draft fell, traded back a bunch of times, end up taking Collier at 29. That was a draft that we went into and everybody knew we had to have defensive line help, maybe more specifically edge help. And as they began to trade back, Brian Burns was a little bit out of reach. And then I remember there were a lot of reports that Jerry Tillery might have been a guy coming out of Notre Dame that they really liked and that they thought they could get trading back. And then they traded back too far. Tillery gets sniped by the Chargers at 28. And that was, and maybe in some ways this trade was a blessing, or this draft was a blessing in disguise, because Schneider has talked so much since then about not drafting for need. They moved back to 29. They needed a DN. They needed an edge. They needed a defensive lineman. And Collier was like the only dude left. And they went that way where they could have had Byron Murphy, right, as a corner. They could have had Deebo Samuel. I mean, the list goes on of guys that they missed out on. And we really won't know until we're on the clock, right? That's what I'm fascinated by, is I don't know how I'm going to feel until we are on the clock and I can see who's available, and then I'll just react organically to what's happening. Like if there's a guy that I want, I'm just going to want to stick and pick, because I'm with you, Ryan. We got to have good players, and we need blue chip players. We need to get as many from Mike Macdonald as we can. And without a native second round pick, that's going to be hard to do. So let's do that. Give me a name or two, Bryce, go back to you, of guys that if they're on the board at 16, that you're hoping and praying and you're sitting at home rooting for them to stay and take that guy.
At 16, if Jazeer Newton, I would say Cooper DeJean, Troy Fonatanu, and Jared Verse. Those are like my four guys. If they're on the board somewhere, those are the guys I want them to go on. Like, I know a lot of people are really high on Byron Murphy as, a potential, game changer on the D line. I just look at Newton. He's so versatile, and to me, he's plug and play right now, and he's going to make an impact on that defensive line if you plug him in. So I'd say those are the four guys for me that if they're on the board at 16, like, I'm sitting there going, are we handing a card in for one of them, or what are we doing?
It's interesting with Murphy because I think he was one of their combine meetings, and they met with Newton there too. But then it was reported he was going to be a 30 visit, and he was scheduled to come to Seattle, and then he never did. I find that interesting because he's a guy that I like too. Newton's fascinating to me because the buzz on him's kind of died down. Even after the good pro day, it looks like he's recovered from the broken foot, but generally regarded to be going in those early 20s. But I don't think anyone would really scream that it was a big reach if they took him at 16. Ryan, who are a couple of guys that you'd be hoping they stay for if you see him still on the board?
Yeah, I mean, Fonatanu, if he's there, I mean, obviously, like, you don't always necessarily want to draft for need, but it's like that is a glaring need, and he's a versatile guy and obviously a stud player. So, like, I would be totally happy with that. Like I said earlier, DeJean, like I just think he's such an impact guy, and you can do so many things with him and give McDonald kind of that just chess piece to move around, and like like we said, 24 is this building block, and this, let's just get as many good players in as we can. And yeah, as far as the edge is concerned and that D line, like like Bryce and I have talked about it too. There's some guys, just that line in general that haven't really got a lot of, like the Derek Halls of the world and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
there's some pieces there that we have, and who else who's coming back. Like we have some guys there that I think, that we don't have to, take a guy at 16, in that position. So so those two guys I mentioned, and I know we'll touch on this earlier, but I'm high on them taking a QB, but I think at 16, you're not going to do it. And Michael Penix, I don't even think he's going to be there. So, so those would be my two guys if they stick and pick there at 16. I think
We're going to get into the QB thing a little bit more later for sure in a couple of different angles. Yeah, you make a really good point about the edge position because Jared Verse is a guy that I'm absolutely in love with and was last year. I remember mocking him a million times to the Seahawks last year when it looked like he was going to come out, made the kind of the last minute decision to go back to Florida State. Just thought he was a perfect fit. But as you said, I mean, there's a lot of depth there and talent, but also investment, right? Those guys are all second round picks. Darrell Taylor's contract isn't guaranteed other than I think like $20,000. So if you did invest in a guy like Verse there, or maybe a Chop Robinson, or if there's some sentiment that Dallas Turner might slide a little bit, that would be an interesting name to put in the mix that you could trade or cut Darrell Turner and save that money. But the more I look at this draft, and then this is going to lead into my next question, the more I look at where the value is. And we're all on the Troy Fautanu train, all three of us. Like, love the guy. Think he'd be the perfect fit, a leader on that position group, potential all-pro, which is what you're hoping to get in the middle of the first round. But do any of us really think he's going to be there, right? Raise your hand if you think he's not going to be there, right? I just don't see it happening. And yet, when I do mock drafts and I start with an offensive lineman, I don't typically like the way the rest of it works out.
right.
Because the ledge that defensive front falls off in some of the other position groups. So, and I know you guys have had Rob Staten on your show. Rob has been talking about this subject now for weeks, and I think he's convinced me that unless a guy like Fautanu is there, that I just, if you take John Schneider at his word and the things he's been saying about interior offensive line, the moves they made, the last one, bringing in Laken Tomlinson, that at the end of the day, what would you, I guess let's put it this way, scale of 1 to 10, Bryce, what do you think the odds are that Schneider would go offensive line in the first round?
2.
Yeah. I think that's what
I don't see it.
That's where I'm at too. Unless it's Fautanu, because I just think that would be everything he talks about BPA, no matter what, they would look up at their board and he'd be there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that too. Like we talked about, and doing our mocks and stuff. But when you trade down and then say a guy like Graham Barton's available, does Schneider go that road? Obviously, a good player, but like you said, that's why I got the scale low too. And Fonatanu, yeah, I mean, realistically, probably won't be at 16, right? So, unless I mean, a guy's got to just pop out at you, or I agree. You got to trade and get back in and get back in a bit of the meat of the draft and just in especially in that second round. It's just such a huge gap.
How do you guys feel about that? Because to me, it might be the one thing about the possible scenarios that we'll see on Thursday that scares me the most is that we're going to get potentially a Creed Humphrey 2.0, because you just mentioned another guy too. I absolutely love Graham Barton.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about some of, guys that we consider our guys later on. Spoiler alert, he's on my list. I just think he's plug and play from day one. He can play multiple positions. He's nasty. He's athletic. He's everything you want in an offensive lineman. He's everything they need. And you can get him in the early 20s. But if Schneider sticks to kind of his MO, he doesn't do that. He goes, and ends up taking the 5th or 6th best player at another position, and we might just be looking at that situation all over again. Are there any other scenarios like I just described that I'm afraid of that you cringe when you think of that you're, because we used to go into drafts with this kind of mindset, right? What are they going to do this year that I'm not expecting that I'm going to hate, right? Are there any scenarios for either of you this year that would fit that mold if they happen?
I have one, and this might shock a lot of people. And it happened to me and Ryan actually on our last show when we did a mock. We traded back. We got to pick 29, and Michael Penix was on the board with Graham Barton and Cooper DeJean. And to me, that's a scary situation because for me, at least, I love Michael Penix. I think he's a great fit in Seattle. But is that value there when there's a Graham Barton? We had Graham Barton on the board and Cooper DeJean, where they fit other holes that we have. We have Geno and Sam Howell, but it's Michael Penix, and he's just a seamless fit in what Ryan Grubb probably wants to do in Seattle. And for me, that's kind of a scary thing because I go, if you take Michael Penix there, and you may get a second round pick, what does that ledge look like for other positions? All of a sudden that run may happen and you miss out because when you trade back, you don't get a high second round. You may get a mid to late second round or even an early third round.
Well, let's get into the quarterback thing then. Ryan, let's start with you. We talked about it on your show a few weeks ago, and just the idea that there was this, Michael Penix kind of has gone through this journey this offseason, right? After the national championship game, he sort of fell out of the first round, I think, in most consensus big boards and mocks, that he was older, injury history, some limitations to his game. And now the buzz just won't stop that he's getting back up into the mid, maybe early first round, and the connections to Seattle are obvious. Until Seattle does something different, the speculation is going to be, and I think it's going to be when we turn on ESPN or NFL Network, whichever your choice is, on Thursday night, I think it's going to be one of the narratives that they really carry into that night. Where does Michael Penix wind up? And here's why it makes so much sense for Seattle. As you go through and look at the quarterback situation, Ryan, and how it relates to what they have on hand now and what they might do Thursday, what's your gut tell you?
My gut, I mean, we went back and forth on the quarterback situation a few times. Obviously, like before Sam, we were pretty dead set. Like, this is the season they get a quarterback. Then when the Sam Howell trade happened, we were like, okay, maybe what does this mean? Does this mean they're out of the running for a QB and they're going to kick the can? And then you kind of look at it, well, they did just lose their backup in Drew Lock, and they got to address that. And we also look at it now, like, you need a viable backup quarterback in this league now. Like, the days are gone where you just have, Joe Schmo as your backup and you ride your stud QB. And if he gets hurt, oh, well, I guess the season's over. Now backup, it's like, hey, no, you need a guy that can come in and just, hold down the ship and get you 2-2 for the next 4 games and until your guy comes back or whatever the timeline is. So I think that's how we look at it too, where, Sam they see some potential in him, but, I now think that they will draft a QB. I just don't know where. I think they're going to go, obviously, day 2. But I just can't see them kicking the can again And the reason I say that, because I just think we're going to have a competitive football team this year. I don't see that. I feel like we're going to be in that exact same position, picking anywhere from maybe 16 to 20, 21, just depending. I mean, maybe we take a little bit of a step back, but I just look at the players we have and just, I don't know. I mean, we haven't even got to training camp, but I've already liked Mike McDonald, and I just think he's definitely going to get that defense better. Yeah, I don't care. I just don't think we're going to have 31st ranked run defense in the league. But I just think so. I think when you take in all that to account, I just don't see how they don't get somebody. So when I look at it, yeah, Penix obviously a smooth transition, but we've talked about. He might go as early as the Raiders. Kind of a fit there. So then what do you do? And we've talked about guys like Jordan Travis, who obviously had that devastating leg injury, but he can play, and he could have been a lot higher on people's boards if he tested and he was healthy. So there could be a guy where you get him and then he sits and he plays behind Geno and just kind of learns the system, because I'm a big fan of that, where a guy can really just sit back a little bit and learn the system, learn the league. You look at Green Bay, you look at teams, even Mahomes, who could have jumped in right off the mix, but maybe that did him some good. So that's kind of where I look at the quarterback situation. So obviously, I'm high on Jordan Travis. I just think that could be a good fit. And I'm also big on Spencer Rattler, but also I don't know, man. I mean, I think his stock's climbing
He's
a
a
little
tough
bit
eval.
too.
Yeah.
He's a tough eval too. He is, but but I guess depends where he's sitting. But so I look at it like I think we do go get a QB.
Bryce, you work with QBs, right? And it's a big part of your life. And we've talked a lot about Michael Penix, and you just said moments ago that you like him. Do you like him enough that you'd be okay with the Seahawks using a first-round pick on him, given that they made the move to get Sam Howell already?
If Seattle can sit with themselves and say it was the best allocation of resources, if they're able to trade back and do it, not at 16. I do not think you take a quarterback at 16. If you're able to move back and get him because he somehow falls, and you can look at yourself and say, okay, this means that next year in 2025, we're expecting Michael Penix to be our franchise quarterback going forward. That's the whole goal I think we have to look at, because we have Geno, we have Sam Howell, who Sam Howell's really only played 1 year. He's played 18 games, basically a rookie last year, essentially. They asked him to do a lot in Washington. So like for me, I don't know. I'm more of the kind of the vibe of trade back, try and get a guy in the second or third, maybe a Spencer Rattler if he's there. But like you said, he's a tough eval. I've gotten really high lately on Michael Pratt. I think he fits what Seattle wants to do. He can make the throws in Ryan Grubb's offense, the same throws Penix made. You look at that program at Tulane, it was a run-heavy offense. They didn't ask him to do a lot, but when you watch him stand in the pocket and deliver the ball, he doesn't shy away from that. Where you see some guys back out, they shy away from it. He'll take the hit, stick in there, and throw it. Our O-line, as we all know, has issues still. So if I'm getting a guy, I'm not looking to get a guy that I need to plug and play. I'm looking at a guy also, and John says it a lot, tilt the room. And it doesn't necessarily mean it tilts it in a physical aspect. Does he walk in the room and people gravitate to him is what he means by tilt the room. And Russell had a way of doing that when he was here. Geno's had a way of doing that since he's taken over. Do you get that out of Sam Howell, or do you get it out of a guy like Michael Pratt that was a captain for 4 years while he was at Tulane? And if you look back, I think it was last year, he beat the supposed number 1 pick in this year's draft in a bowl game with all the talent USC has. Michael Pratt outdueled Caleb Williams. And I think that kind of gets forgotten a little bit.
As a guy who coaches quarterbacks, tell me about Pratt's delivery, because I've read some things that there are some scouts that don't like his mechanics.
So Pratt's delivery is a little elongated. It takes a little bit more to get there, and some scouts don't like it. Some scouts still like the Dan Marino up and out, snap, really quick, fire it out. But like part of it is you look at what were they asking Michael Pratt to do? He was doing a lot of jet read option fakes. So you're selling things hard and then coming out of that to make the throw. I like his delivery. I don't have a problem. I think it's something you can clean up the speed of it a bit as you get him into a program and you build, because again, you got to look at what was he being coached at with Tulane when they're not a heavy pass team. So then you go and you look at teams that have heavy pass offenses, like Washington had a decently high pass offense. You look at the mechanics that Michael Penix has. They're a little unorthodox even, but if he can spin the ball and he can get it to where it needs to go.
Delivery, yeah.
And I also look at what the one thing for me that I really like about Pratt is how well he goes through his progressions. How he goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to his check down. There's no inconsistency with that. He knows where to go, where his next read takes him based on what defense is giving. And he has an ability to lead guys. Like you listen to a lot of his teammates talk about him. They loved playing for him. And that's where you talk about like a Spencer Rattler. He's got a bit of a rap. He's trying to get through that whole, navigate that whole scenario of what happened to him when he was 17 and the attitude issues and everything. You insert a guy like a Michael Pratt that, no one's really got questions about his leadership capabilities. And yes, there's mechanical things, but if he's sitting for a year, that's what you hire your QB coach for. He's supposed to be there working with those things. That's what I look at. When I look at quarterbacks and I evaluate their throwing mechanics, what offense are you in? How hard is it to clean it up? Is it something like Tim Tebow where he used to have the weird windmill? Yeah. That's something that's kind of an inexcusable thing. If we're talking about a slight tweak of an elbow or a shoulder alignment to get the ball out a little bit quicker, like half a second, that's something that's usually workable.
It's interesting. I mentioned this before we hit record. Tom Pelissaro did a piece on NFL.com today that's incredibly in-depth where he talks to a lot of unnamed coaches, executives around the league, AFC, NFC, about 20 different quarterback prospects and gets into them. And just a couple of things that scouts are saying about Michael Pratt that mirror what you were just talking about. He's a guy that could have gone elsewhere in the transfer portal and NIL era, but he chose to stick it out at Tulane. A lot of respect for that. One scout says you can see on tape, does a great job with his progressions. He's accurate. And another guy says he's going to make a roster because he's going to flash in the preseason. He's a guy that can move around and make some plays. And then to your point about mechanics, one AFC offensive coordinator said he's a break him down, build him back up guy mechanically. But I always think about, people forget, man. Do you remember what Aaron Rodgers looked like coming out of Cal? It was ugly.
Mm-hmm.
Like it
was really ugly.
They forced him to hold the ball really, really high. It just looked so mechanical and robotic. And they showed it again the other day on Path to the Draft. I had forgotten how bad it looked. And obviously changed it and completely transformed it. He didn't have to play right away. And that kind of speaks to your point that, maybe that's to their favor. I mentioned to you guys before we hit record that I had kind of come full circle on how I viewed Sam Howell and the quarterback situation when he was acquired, because he's a guy that I was high on coming out of the draft a couple of years ago. And I tend to see more of the positives out of his performance in Washington last year than some of the people that just look at the interceptions and say that he had a bad year. And, when I think about in terms of, it was about a mid fourth round value to do the pick swap to get him this year. So if you imagine this year taking a 23-year-old quarterback of Sam Howell's talent in the fourth round would make some sense. So when we got him, Schneider's comments about how much they liked him a couple of years ago, I thought they're taking a shot at a guy who at a very low acquisition cost could be a franchise quarterback moving forward. And that could be true, but I don't think that's why they acquired him. I think once they lost Drew Lock, I think they wanted Drew back. And then they realized there was at least one team, and that's all it takes, that was willing to pay him. Now we know up to $8 million if he hits some playing time in New York. They weren't going to be able to match that, wouldn't have anyway. And that they wanted an experienced backup that if Geno went down, a guy that could come in and win games, and they were able to get him for a pick swap and $1 million a year. I think primarily the Sam Howell move now wasn't so much a chance to get your future quarterback as it was to just get a really good deal on a fun backup, which leads me to my point that I think anything's on the table this Thursday. I think anything's on the table, and it could be Michael Penix, or it could be a move like you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like the, exactly what you're saying. I think I agree. And I mentioned that earlier, just, You need a viable backup now, and like you said, he was there. He's nothing on your pay against your cap, and like you said, he's an experienced guy at a young age. I mean, you look at that all, you add all those things up. I mean, why are you not going to pull the trigger on that? And especially when guys are paying $8 million for Drew Lock, right? If he hits everything, it's insane. So especially in this market today, to get a guy like that, a young guy that has potential, that can come in if Gino goes down, and you can still feel pretty good about your chances going out on Sunday and competing in a football game. So I agree too. I think anything could be on the table. But yeah, I'm all for, like, I think I'd be surprised if they don't take one now. I just do. I just do. And because of the kicking the can down, because if you fast forward a year from now, what are you going to do? I mean, you almost have to take one then. I mean, you would think, right? So then you just ask yourself, like, what are you looking for? You can't just look for the perfect guy and just keep kicking it down the road like
There
Bryce
aren't
mentioned,
any. Yeah.
right? And mechanical
There's
things
scouts
can
that
get
don't like
fixed.
Caleb Williams.
No, and for sure. And I think at the end of the day, we got to realize all these guys are prospects. You go down all
Mhm.
the drafts. There's no guarantee that Caleb is a superstar after 5-6 years in the league. It just doesn't work like that. So I think that if you like Michael Penix that much and you want to pick him in the first round, I honestly wouldn't be mad at that either.
You guys definitely check out, and I mean you two guys, but also anyone watching, check out that piece today, because the one thing that stands out to me is you go down prospect by prospect and you start at Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels and Drake May, and every single one of them, there's at least one quote from an executive or a coach in there
Mhm.
that's negative, that there's things they don't like about all these guys. And so, yeah, to your point, let's talk about some other positions. We talked about all of our favorite dudes in the first round, and I think that qualifies and fits the definition of my guy, someone that we would stick and pick for at 16. Bryce, let's start with you. Regardless of round, day 2 or day 3, who are some other guys that you just can't get away from, that you just like, whether it makes sense or not? And every time you do a mock draft, you're hoping they fall to you.
So one guy is Brandon Coleman from TCU. I think every single one of my mock drafts, I take him because he's so athletic, and his flexibility to move up and down the line, I think, could be huge. I think he has high potential as an upscale starter in the right system. Another guy that I would say for me is a guy that I'm always trying to take if I can is Chris Jenkins from Michigan, the mutant, as they've called him. And then my other non-negotiable, really, most drafts is either a mix between Edgerrin Cooper or Jaden Hicks out of Washington State. Those two guys, yep, I know. And Brennan Jackson's another guy for me that I always try and get in the later rounds, but he keeps moving up the board.
Yeah, he does.
But for me, like, those guys kind of in that bracket there, I love how Cooper flies around. He's got some flaws. He's very instinctual right off the bat to go to the first thing he sees, which, kind of needs to be coached out. But his athletic upside and the things he can do, watching him fly around.
Yeah.
And same with Jaden Hicks and Brennan Jackson. Like, both those guys out of Washington, they're great character guys to have in, but they're going to be impact players in the league, I think. Especially Jackson, I think if someone teaches him a counter move or two to what he does well, he could be Max Crosby scary for a D-line.
Yeah, Jenkins almost made my list. The production wasn't there, and I think Mazzie Smith's poor rookie year might scare some people away from a Michigan interior defensive lineman. But everything you hear about this kid, his leadership ability, how he carries himself in the locker room, his athletic ability, and the fact that he didn't show up on the stat sheet a lot because he did all the dirty work. I think he could fit in anywhere up and down that line as a big end or on all fours inside, and he'd be a fun one for sure. Ryan, who are some of your guys you would pound the table for?
I mean, pound the table. It depends. I mean, we mentioned him just earlier on the show. Graham Barton, I am a big fan of, just because I think you insert plug and play, and I think maybe you can get that guy if you trade down from 16. You maybe he's there at the later at the first round, and you kind of snatch that guy up. I really like just everything about him. And then Bryce mentioned, but I'm also a fan of Jaden Hicks. I just think, you can, another guy that you can give Mike McDonald and the defense, and just kind of just a character guy, and just have another really solid guy, and for Mike to just work with in 24, and just accumulate, solid good players. And then if I looked at like later rounds, because we always talk in our mock, so I don't know, I mean, pounding the table, but just another guy that we talk about, that, a receiver could be, sort of something under the radar, that people, think, well, we're set at receiver, right? We have JSN and DK and Tyler and all this kind of stuff. But you look how expensive the receiver, room is right now. And of course, I don't want DK going anywhere, but you just sort of look at that. And so just a guy that you can maybe get later, like say in the 6th round, and smaller slot kind of guy that you could throw in that grub system would be Taj Washington. I like his game. Huge yak guy. And I know he's a pretty small frame dude, but I think, again, you can get him in the slot, and if you can get him in, and also just with the new kick return format, I just think there just could be a place for him, that, some scat back slot style guy that can, he catches the ball and he picks up yards. So I like him. So, if you just those guys right there, just kind of looking later in the draft, if we picked up a receiver, I'd be all in for him too.
Yeah, I got a couple. Unfortunately, some of them fall in that 2nd round range, where right now it just looks like we won't have a shot at him. Guys like, I love Cole Bishop out of Utah. I just think he's so smooth in everything that he does, and would really be that interchangeable safety piece that McDonald likes. I love the raw. I'm a sucker for motor and upside, and Rukarororo. Like, I just think the sky's the limit for that dude. And if he maybe went back to school for another year and refined some things, that he might have been in the 1st round conversation. And then you talk about motor, Brennan Jackson was going to be on my list. You already mentioned him. So I'll go with Braden McGregor, another guy that knows Mike McDonald from Michigan, and dude that I think is kind of on the rise. Jim Nagy was tweeting out some stuff about him the other day, about how impressive he was at the Senior Bowl, and how he finished so strong last year. I think he had 4.5 sacks over his last 5 games, really finished strong, looked like a menace in the national championship game. And then I got 2 others. If we don't go offensive guard early, which we don't think we're going to, a guy that's kind of late to my radar and is really gotten into my sights is Dominic Pooney out of Kansas, guy that played mostly tackle, projects to guard because of his arm length, but just moves really well, and he's nasty. Right, just likes to bury guys, and his pass protection numbers are outstanding. Like, I think he allowed single-digit pressures last year playing in the Big 12, where everybody just spreads you out and throws it all over the place. Really impressive. And then you talk about receivers. Probably one of my guys of the offseason, hasn't changed. I'm a huge Luke McCaffrey guy. I just love how that dude moves. When he showed up at the combine and he's running routes, and you realize he's only been playing the position for 2 years. I mean, I couldn't wrap my head around that. Like, he looks like a guy that's been playing it for a long, long time. And he's 1/10 of a second faster than his brother Christian. So I think that'd be the ultimate troll move for the 49ers if we were to take his brother Luke.
That'd be great.
And unleash him against the 49ers. Let's do this before we get into it. We're gonna do a live mock draft in a few moments. Using our new favorite mock draft simulator that I know that we've all discovered in the last month. But I want to ask you this first of all, because this is something that every time I suggest it, for the most part, it kind of gets tossed aside. Outside of Cooper DeJean, who I think the Seahawks fan base is really warmed up to, and especially if they were to trade back and get him, I think he'd be an easy sell to the fan base because of the versatility and just how damn good he is and how athletic he is. But I've been selling the idea, especially in a trade back, but maybe even at 16, that if that run on quarterbacks leads to a run on tackles, right, leads to a run on those top couple edge guys, Dallas Turner, Jared Verse-Go, that it's very possible that for the 2nd year in a row, when the Seahawks look up on their whiteboard when they're on the clock, be it at 16 or later, that the guy at the top of their grading system and the top of their board is going to be a corner. And Mike McDonald has talked about how he wants to lock down the edges and the boundaries. And the speculation, I know you've had Greg Bell on your show. I had him on mine last week, and he said he thinks, and Paul Moyer said the same thing. He thinks that McDonald's going to want to use Devin Witherspoon in much the same way he was used last year. That it just makes too much sense to have him close to the line of scrimmage, have him playing inside. So, of course, we don't know about how they feel about Trey Brown, Reek Woolen, Mike Jackson, those other guys. But how would the two of you feel if they went corner, if they went a Terrion Arnold or a Kool-Aid McKinstry or a Quinyon Mitchell, who would easily make a my guys list if we're talking about first round guys as well, who's had some comps to Devin Witherspoon? A lot of fans would hate it, but Bryce, I'll start with you. How would you feel if they went corner in the first round?
If they came out of the first round with Quinyon Mitchell and they have a plan on how they're going to use Witherspoon going forward, and honestly, I think we talked about it, Dan, about possibly Tariq even being a possible trade potential candidate in the draft if it was to get you some picks in capital, because no one's really said a lick about him, whether it's John, whether it's Mike McDonald. And we're talking about a guy that his first year went to the Pro Bowl as a rookie and was considered one of the second best young corner going into last year. And he had some issues, health and whatnot. But if they plan on using Witherspoon the same way, I would be okay with them actually walking out of there if they get a top corner, like a Quinyon Mitchell type of guy that's going to come in and be an impact guy right away. I know, like you said, people would be up in arms. But again, people have to understand this team isn't winning the Super Bowl this year. They're not necessarily competing for the Super Bowl. We still have to get out of being third in our own division before we can think about that.
Yeah.
Adding pieces like this when you're playing the 49ers and you're playing the Rams, another impact guy like this in the secondary could make a big difference.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. Quinyon Mitchell. I mean, you look at the number 5 pick last year when we took Devin Witherspoon. I mean, how many people were expecting that? I know there was some hints, but you really had to be involved to really start hearing that. Anthony Richardson was a name we thought obviously they were going to take talking quarterbacks if Indianapolis, but Jalen Carter's name, that was the huge debate. Do they take Jalen? I mean, Witherspoon, it's and again, that was at number 5. So, if whether they sticked and picked or moved down a little bit, Quinyon Mitchell, because I agree with Bryce, especially you have Mike McDonald as defensive head coach, just build dogs, pieces, Devin Witherspoon. If you had another guy with that just instinct, that, killer instinct and obviously can play the game. I mean, why not? I mean, I don't see if you're a fan of this team, you can't be upset about that. I mean, yeah, we will, and that's not to say they're not going to dress the line or get a guy. Abe Lucas was a 3rd round pick for us, and he turned out great, right? Obviously now he's got some injury issues, but I mean, yeah, I would be all for it, especially if he's as advertised and he comes in, somebody like Devin and just wreaks havoc. I mean, like I said, I wish we had a few more Devin Witherspoon style guys, not the talent aside, just that mentality and, killer instinct that's what you want. Right. So yeah, I would not be upset. I think, it would sort of be not what we've been talking about, but then you start looking at it from another angle and you're like, okay, I can kind of see what they're trying to do here.
Yeah. And you always have to take finances into account, and you see what corners are paid when they hit the open market. Not a bad idea to keep adding to those guys. And you talk about play style and Bryce, you talked about Quinyon Mitchell, and the most common comp I see for him is Devin Witherspoon. And then another guy that I love, although he wouldn't, some people talk about him in the back end of the first round conversation. But I think in part because of a little bit slower 40 at the combine than some people were hoping for, probably an early mid second round guy. Ennis Rakestraw is another guy that I absolutely love, where the play style is very reminiscent. When I turn on his tape, I see a little bit of Devin Witherspoon in him. And the Reek Woolen thing is fascinating because, as you mentioned, they haven't talked much about him. It's, I've talked about it on my show that it would make sense after the cornerback group falls off, maybe round 3 or so, that, would there be some interest in him? Maybe get some picks. But then, then the Seahawks PR team goes out and tweets a video of him yesterday or the day before, where it's got some of his UTSA highlights spliced together with some of his highlights from the last 2 years. And for all the grief he took last year in his poor tackling, he shows him just coming up and hitting dudes and laying the lumber and making plays and pick six and knocking balls away. And you're like, all right, maybe I don't want to move on from that quite yet until we can see what Mike McDonald can do with him. One more guy that we haven't talked about, and I know I would hear about it in the comments if we don't bring him up, but it's kind of gotten a new life this week. I think it was either it was who reported, it was either Adam Schefter or it was Ian Rappaport.
Are you talking about?
No. We're going to talk about Brock Bowers for a second because you're going to bring up Rashad Penny. Talking about draft memories. It was Ian Rappaport, I'm pretty sure, that came out and said Brock Bowers is most teams expect him to go between 10 and 16. And I thought it was interesting that he mentioned 16. Like, that implied, in the way some people took that, was, well, then he has some intel that would be the floor. Did you take that to mean that you think that the Seahawks would seriously consider taking Bowers at 16, a need that some fans might disagree is pressing? Or do you take that to mean that would give the Seahawks quite a bit of leverage if Bowers is sitting there at 16 because some teams would be wanting to move up and get him?
I think it's the latter. I think it's teams moving up to get Bowers, not Seattle. I just don't see, like, if John took him, and I get people have comped Bowers as George Kittle 2.0, and he's this, possibly a home run hit at the tight end position. We talked just a moment ago about, hey, how upset would people be if we took a corner? I look at our tight end room, and yes, we have Pharaoh Brown and Noah Fant, but even in Ryan Grubb's offense last year with Culp and Westover, they were part of it, but they weren't massively a part of it. A lot of what they did was 3 receiver sets, so you don't have 2 tight ends on the field. So you already have Noah Fant, who's still, I think, a good young tight end. I think it's more of a, hey, 16's where you need to, the last spot you could possibly trade up into to get Brock Bowers. So I think it's a leverage play for Seattle.
Yeah, I agree. Ryan, how would you feel if they did take Brock Bowers, though? I mean, it doesn't seem to be a pressing need, but the dude, just as a prospect alone, it's hard to argue.
Yeah, I mean, how would I feel? I mean, I would probably just be like, what are they doing? I mean, yeah, like you said, the comps to George Kittle. I mean, if he turns into George Kittle, sure. But like I said, you can comp all day long, and it doesn't mean he's going to be George Kittle at the end of the day. I think that would be one, like Bryce said, you have a Noah Fant, with the way Grubb runs his offense and the firepower we have at receiver. There's just way more pressing needs. And I think impactfully, like, that's why I would way rather them draft a corner or, something like that, where you could just, shape up this defense and just, I don't know. That would be one where I don't know about upset, but
it'd probably be the biggest head scratcher.
It would be a head scratcher. But I also agree with Bryce. I think it's more the latter two. I think it'd more be like a leverage play, but definitely a head scratcher. But, obviously the guy is highly regarded, and if he's as advertised and he comes in and becomes this guy, sure. But it'd be a head scratcher for sure.
I keep, I guess to sum this up before we move on to another subject, is I feel like no matter what they do in the first round, if it's not an interior offensive lineman, a big segment of the fan base is going to be upset with it. No matter who the player is, just because the perception is that that's the biggest need. And most fans don't, they don't know enough about Oluwatimi, or they don't know if he's a player. We don't know enough. Anthony Bradford's an unknown. Laken Tomlinson might be seen as an over the hill player. So I do think a portion of the fan base is going to be wringing their hands at the end of day one if they don't take an offensive lineman one way or another.
The thing that I think about with that, and I think for people like ourselves that do study the draft intensively, there isn't as much of a massive drop off from capable starter and plug and play to all pro. Like we talk about Fuagu and Fonatanu and Barton. I look at a board and I go, okay, well, there's other guys like Christian Haynes from UConn is another guy that's really good that you could get in day 2 or day 3 of the draft potentially. Roger Rosengard from Washington is another really good. Like there's more, I would say, value in a way where you can still get guys that can come and compete and play in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round of this draft and not have the steep decline if you miss out on a blue chip defensive player. Like we said, with the edge rushers and the linebackers, it just falls off a cliff into what you get next. And that's where I look at it. And like, I agree with you. I think there is going to be a big faction of Seahawks fans going to go, why didn't we take an interior line? Why did we take a Cooper DeJean or whatever? And then we go back and we may look at it and we may go, yeah, if Cooper DeJean comes in and he plays as a weapon for us and is making plays, no one's going to remember at the end of this year where Cooper DeJean was picked and who was picked around him, right?
I feel like the drama that the NFL has built into this thing now by stretching it out over 3 days is because we felt it last year when we all went into the draft feeling like the Seahawks didn't do enough in the offseason to address defensive line. Yeah. That they just still didn't have enough bodies there, enough depth there, maybe enough upside there. And even after day 1 and day 2, they still hadn't addressed it outside of Derek Hall, who was an outside linebacker. So going into day 3 last year, everyone was freaking out. And then they take Cameron Young and Mike Morris. And if they do, it just kind of shines a greater light on what you do in the first round, good or bad. Yeah. Because fans won't find out until the next day. So we're going to do a mock draft now. And we didn't really talk about any kind of parameters or rules or anything that we kind of had in mind for this. Let me get this set up in the background while we're talking about this. But my thought, and Ryan and I had a chance to talk about it a little bit, Bryce, before you showed up, was I had a thought that, because I've seen a lot of the mocks you guys have done too, and we talked about it at the top of the show, we all tend to kind of follow the same MO. We try to trade back, try to accumulate a bunch of picks. And more often than not, lately, we take an offensive lineman first because that's what we want, right? So I want to see what a live mock draft will look like if we go defense first, because of what you were just talking about, Bryce, the depth in the offensive line market, basically, in the draft. And then I had thought that we would just decide ahead of time we would stick at 16, see what that looked like. But let's just see how the board falls, and we'll go from there. You guys good with that?
I'm good with that.
That sounds awesome. Let's do it. And
I'll just say this: none of us are paid to promote this mock draft simulator, but we've just become such big fans of it. I'm going to bring it in here. First of all, we got to get rid of this overlay. This is Walk the Mock. And for those of you who haven't tried it out yet, I recommend using it on a laptop or PC. I've talked to the developers. They're aware of how it's not really formatted ideally for a smartphone at the moment. It's something they'll work on in the future. One of the things I love about this, they're really open to suggestions and input. Love the interface. Kind of reminds me of, ESPN back in the day. But also when it comes to trading, we get to see some of the trade chart values, and that allows us to kind of move around. So you ready to hit start, guys? See how this works out?
Go. Absolutely.
So we start, and then it allows you to just skip to your pick. And right off the bat, this one looks really chalky, which I like. So every once in a while, these simulators, the algorithm decides to throw you a curveball. But, we're Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, McCarthy, Harrison. Doesn't look like the simulator has done any trades. Chargers go Verse at 5. It's kind of a curveball. That certainly impacts our choice at 16. Then Neighbors, Adunze, May falls to 8, which I don't see that as being that unrealistic. There's some buzz that he may be slipping down some teams' boards. Mm-hmm. There's Fautanu at 10 to the Jets, which makes all the sense in the world to me. I have a hard time seeing him get past that. And then Penix at 11. So they have McCarthy going 3. the popular choice these days. You guys have seen it. Everyone has the Vikings moving up to 4 to get McCarthy if he should fall.
Right.
Well, I just saw even something they were saying that his odds have gone up that he might even end up with the Commanders now.
Wow.
Now, the biggest curveball, and really, I think what's become unrealistic here is they've got Bo Nix 13 to the Raiders. That's not going to happen. In fact, I think one of the prevailing rumors right now, as far as the quarterback market goes, is that he's falling out of the first round altogether.
Right.
Go ahead, Bryce. You were going to say something?
Well, he's an interesting guy to me. Like, I look at Bo Nix and I go, we had him penciled in, like him and Michael Penix were 5-6 in this group. Like they were flip-flopping every other week. And the thing I think that's really interesting is just how everyone loved Bo Nix at Oregon this year in college. I'm a big college football guy. Everyone loved Bo Nix and what he was doing. He was a Heisman finalist. Even his year before at Oregon, he was really good. And then all of a sudden, everyone started nitpicking, well, how does Oregon run their offense? He's throwing all these passes behind the line of scrimmage, and they're short little bubbles. And how does this translate to the NFL game? But the thing with Nix that I went back and specifically watched the first Washington matchup this year in Seattle, and how he's able to manipulate and move and make throws on the run in an unclean pocket down the field outside the numbers was actually really impressive. And I think it gets kind of forgotten because of what the majority of Oregon's offense is. And Bo Nix did a lot of that when he was at Auburn. And like, as much as I wouldn't, if Seattle took him in the first round, I'd shake my head and go, well, what are we doing with our allocation of capital? But Bo Nix is a guy in the second, third round, maybe, because he could fall that far. He'd be someone that I'd also possibly be slightly interested in as a developmental prospect, but I don't see him going anywhere close to the Raiders at 13.
It's interesting because for months, it was kind of a foregone conclusion in just about every mock draft you saw that he was going to go 12 to the Broncos because he just seems to be a fit, kind of a poor man's Drew Brees a little bit, bigger, obviously, than Drew and more athletic, but similar play style. If that had been the case, you could have said, okay, this mock might not be specifically accurate, but if you flip-flopped, if you had, for instance, if you had Atlanta instead of going Drake May, if he had gone earlier, maybe they go Dallas Turner because that's been widely mocked. That's kind of where he ends up going. You just flip flop those guys. Maybe it does make sense. But I don't know that it really impacts the Seahawks. I think the Raiders would more likely they could go with a Fuaga out of Oregon State, maybe if Nix wasn't the pick, or they might go defensive line. That could be a spot for Byron Murphy. But here's what our board looks like, and just kind of what we were talking about. There's Brock Bowers, and this is exactly what I was talking about earlier, where you get the runs on those premium positions, and so a really good cornerback group just got pushed down, and you're the Seahawks sitting here at 16. You're looking up, and you have cornerback 1. You have your choice of all the cornerbacks. They're all there. And then Talisi Fuaga is a guy that's there as well. But I think let's not take an offensive lineman.
Yeah,
I agree.
I want to see how that looks. What are your guys' thoughts on Leatu Latu? Because it seems like in the last 2 weeks, he has become a sort of a popular choice for the Seahawks in mock drafts. It's either Fautanu or I'm seeing a lot of Latu. Obviously, the medicals are going to be key here. Spinal fusion surgery is no joke. If you have even though he's played 2 productive years at UCLA, but just stylistically, Bryce, I'll start with you. He's a guy that's known for his toolbox, right? His hands, his pass rush moves, not necessarily an edge setter. Do you think he even fits a Mike Macdonald defense?
I think for me, there's 2 things about him that don't fit. One is Mike Macdonald's defense. If you look at the guys he's had play edge for him in Baltimore as one, he brought in guys like Kyle Vanoy and older guys that, could truly set an edge. The other part is I look at the division we play in. Like, you talk about the injury history with him and setting an edge. What do the Niners and the Rams love to do with their run games? They love to run outside zone, and they love to run a bit of gap. And I don't see him being a guy that's going to be able to turn and set that edge properly. To me, he kind of reminds me a little bit of a better polished coming out of college version of Frank Clark a little bit. And Frank Clark struggled to set the edge a lot of times when he was in Seattle. So for me, I'm not as high on him. I think in a pure pass rushing situation, I think he's a phenomenal guy. He's got a lot of things he can do with his hands. He's a great technician of it. But to be someone I'm taking the first round as an edge, I want you to be able to play a majority of the snaps. I don't see that for him. He seems more of a specialist to me in a way, like for his ability to rush the passer.
Ryan, do you see any of these guys here that you think are stick and pick, or should we look at moving back a little bit? Because here's what we've got on the board.
Yeah,
I want to try and walk through this for some of those that are listening
Yeah.
on audio as well. But yeah, Brock Bowers, then all the corners, Quinyon Mitchell, Terrion Arnold, and then you got a bunch of offensive tackles, Fuaga, Byron Murphy still there, Latu, then J.C. Latham, Nate Wiggins, a couple of receivers, Cooper DeJean is still there, Jackson Powers Johnson. We're not going to go offensive line, and there's your guy Johnny Newton. Is that enough value there that you want to try to move back?
I mean, if we're not sticking and picking, I mean, yeah, you got some guys that I think you still could get later in the first. You're taking a chance, but I mean, the way these mocks have went, DeJean's been there.
This is one of those situations. I'll be honest. When I said earlier that I won't know until Thursday when the Seahawks are on the clock how I'm going to feel about what I want them to do, if this exact scenario plays out,
right,
I'm kind of crossing my fingers and hoping they take Quinyon Mitchell.
Okay, I mean, I wouldn't be mad at that. I was looking at that. I mean, Quinyon, it'd be just Devin all over again, except 16 instead of 5. I mean, I'm all for, like we've talked about in this last hour, all for getting impact guys, especially on that blue chippers on that defense. Yeah. There's only so many blue chippers, and if you can get that guy, and I think we've all kind of talked about Reek. I think there's one corner spot solidified. Like you said, he's going to move around anyways. This kid would just come right in and make an impact. So yeah, I mean, I could see them sticking and picking. I mean, like you said, it's going to be so crazy on Thursday because you just don't know if they stick and pick. I mean, Dan, you'd be surprised, right? If they say just that, I just think about the gap. I just think about John wanting to get back in the second and looking at that. But again,
I do, and especially because when you look at the guys they brought in for 30 visits, Jared Verse might be the only guy that projects to be, taken between 5 and 15. All the rest of them are kind of projected from 20 to 50.
Right. Yeah. So for me, either take Quinyon or you move down. You still might get a pretty good player.
Bryce, how do you feel about this? Because one of the things I would like about looking at this scenario would be, again, we've shared a lot of mocks amongst us. This would be a little different than what we typically do.
I agree, but if I'm going to stick and pick here, and I get what the love with Quinyon Mitchell is, and Ryan talked about a weapon and versatility, I would rather take Cooper DeJean here because you can move him around like a chess piece.
Yeah.
We have 3 safeties on this roster in Jenkins, Love, and Wallace that are all on basically 1-year deals. Love's about to expire. Wallace has no guarantee he makes the roster.
Yeah.
That guy, sure, if you want to go this year and say, hey, Cooper DeJean, we're going to play you outside, but then next year you decide, okay, we're not bringing back Jenkins or Wallace, you bump him to safety.
Well, what about this idea? What about if you take a guy like Cooper DeJean, he could be your Kyle Hamilton, right? He could be the guy that's playing. And not only this, and this is something that Greg Bell talked about a little bit, that, Pete Carroll never let, except for with rare occasion with Richard, never had his corners travel.
Right.
It left cornerback, right cornerback. Mike McDonald has not done that. What if he sees Devin Witherspoon as the guy that blankets the number one guy, that always follows the number one guy, switches sides, kind of that chess piece? Cooper DeJean gives you that guy in the middle that kind of holds down that. He can come off the edge and he can cover tight ends and he can take, the third option. Do you want to try moving back a couple of spots, or
I think
would you be afraid? Or because he's 24 on their board.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm just looking at who's between us. I think you could move back with either Philly
at 22
or Green Bay and get a second-round pick and potentially, because the other thing we got to think about here, like you said, how many corners are on the board?
Yeah.
I think Philly's a sweet spot here because they need corner help. So
Yeah.
they may come up for a Quinyon Mitchell and give us a second-round pick.
If this is the way the board is, you have Bowers and all the corners. I think Seattle's in a sweet spot.
Yeah.
I think this is where you go 22 to
agree.
Philly and see if we can get maybe 2 more extra picks out of them.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go back to all the way to Green Bay. I
think 22 is a sweet spot here.
Let's see what Philly's got to give. So it's 1,000 points for the 16th pick. So we'd get 122,
221,
221. It's a little bit of an overpay, but if you've got the leverage,
and in this case we do, I think you could do this.
Yeah. And it's one of those things too. People play around with this all the time. Maybe we'd have to throw one of our later picks in as a swap or a future pick or whatever. But I think you could leverage. Everyone has access to these charts now, and so sometimes I'll post ideas, and you'll get ripped if it's an overpay by 50 or 100 points. But sometimes teams will because of what's on the board here. Let's do that. Let's move back.
They took Quinyon Mitchell right off the board.
Right,
nice. There you go.
All right, cross your fingers. Okay,
he's there.
So yeah, and this particular simulation seems really accurate so far. Arnold goes to Jacksonville. J.C. Latham goes off the board. Latu goes to the Rams. That makes a ton of sense. Keon Coleman to the Steelers. There you go. Another weapon for Russell Wilson. And then Fuaga to the Dolphins. That makes a ton of sense too. All right, we're taking Cooper DeJean here, right?
Yep.
I think so, yeah. This gives us a weapon for Mike McDonald.
And because I don't know exactly how it's pronounced, I'm just gonna rotate back and forth. I'm just gonna call him DeJean and then DeJean.
Fair enough.
All right, so now we have a second round pick, which is cool because we're gonna get into this range where we haven't had access to.
I'm very interested right now on where Brock Bowers went because he didn't go in the next 2 picks.
He fell to
Tampa Bay at 126 or a 126 pick. Yeah, wow.
No, Baker Mayfield will be excited about that.
Yeah, no kidding.
I don't see him getting that far.
No.
All right, so here's what we have on the board. Seahawks are sitting there at 221. Edgerrin Cooper. This is the next 5 or 6 on the big board. Edgerrin Cooper, Tyler Nubin. So this is another interesting spot to trade down into because now you're looking at linebacker 1 on the board, safety 2, if you consider DeJean a safety, right? There's Braden Fisk, who the Seahawks have met with, Peyton Wilson. So you have your pick of linebackers. There's your guy, Chris Jenkins. All the receivers and tight ends are there. There's probably going to be a run on receivers in the second round. Junior Colson's there. Mike Sanders still. Anyone stand out to you?
Those 2 right there stand out to me because I know there's been a lot of talk right now about Braden Fisk because he was originally on my board, but there's been a lot of medical stuff that's kind of been not the greatest to hear that they don't really want to talk about what's going on. So, what does the interior D-line look like besides Braden Fisk there, Dan?
So you go Fisk, Jenkins, Ororo, Mason Smith, who Chad Reeder just had the Seahawks taking in the second round in his full 7-round mock. Michael Hall.
Brandon I like Michael Hall, actually, a lot. I think you can get him later.
There's some depth here. Let's look at interior offensive line, too, I suppose.
Yeah.
So there's Haynes. Basically, the whole second tier is still available.
Right.
It means Mahogany. I would imagine there's McCormick.
Leighton Robinson's another guy I'm interested in from Texas A&M, but you can get him later on. Is there potential that we move back here and recoup another 3rd-round pick potentially with how much is left on the board, or is that something you guys aren't interested in?
No, there is. I'm down.
I'm interested. I mean, I think because you're almost a full.
Let's
look at Houston.
Okay.
Houston. How many picks? Yeah. Let's take a look at that because we could try Green Bay too because they got 11 picks in this draft. Houston's got they have an extra 4th, an extra 6th, an extra 7th, so they might. Let's see, 221 to 227 would be a difference of 60. It would get you. Well, it could get you another 4th, and
I'd say another 4th. We could take both their 4th. That gives us a lot of meat there.
2 4ths and then move down in the second.
If
that's a little steep.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we could swap with them, but that wouldn't really make sense. How about if we just do an extra 4 and a 6 is almost even.
Yeah, there you go.
But it does, it gives you that we'd have 3 4th-round picks after this by just moving down 6 spots when we like a bunch of guys on the board.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's do it. Houston's got a good enough roster; they can afford to. Have you looked at their roster? Holy crap! They've done incredible work.
Talk about a turnaround, from where they were after Deshaun Watson to what they are now,
and quickly.
All right, so by moving down, Fisk went off the board. Cooper, Newman, Cameron Kinchins, who the Seahawks met with, Jonah Ellis, and Jalen Bullock.
Do we look at addressing a linebacker now? I mean, we're high on. I mean, I like Peyton Wilson. I mean, you look at kind of the two guys that we have that are sort of like, quote unquote tryout.
The guy that's creeped up for me is Jeremiah Trotter, actually.
Same.
Yeah, I mean,
I wasn't that high on him early just because he's not a guy that's flashy necessarily. But the more I just, the narrative is super instinctive, really smart. Yeah. And then the comp that I've heard recently, and even size-wise it works, is very, very similar stylistically to Patrick Queen.
That's what I've heard, and that's why I like him. And the fact that he's in high IQ linebackers, considering, and that's the thing we also have to take into account with these picks of guys that we're taking on defenses. Mike McDonald has said he wants guys that are smart. You need to be smart to play on my defense. Look at the offenses we're going against in Kyle Shanahan, Mike McVay, two of the best play callers in football.
Yeah.
If I'm going to go linebacker, I think I'm going to go Jeremiah Trotter. What does the edge room look like right now? Actually, I'm kind of curious.
You're down into Austin.
Wow, that's the clip we were talking about.
Yeah.
This is why you wonder at this point if on day 2 the Seahawks aren't getting some phone calls about Darrell Taylor.
That's what I mean. Yeah, like he could be very viable at this point.
What about O-line right now?
Now, interior offensive line still deep enough.
Yeah.
And here's my thing of I kind of think, okay, so we have 227, then we have 317, and then we have those 4 or those 3/4. Trotter was ranked 75th on their board.
I think we have to take him here and then get our O-lines in that 4th round, maybe.
I can see them going linebacker early because it's just a huge need. They need a guy on a rookie contract.
Yeah.
But I think he's a guy that they could find a role for as a rookie as well.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw it.
I think he could push a Jerome Baker for playing time, ironically enough. I think him or Dotson could be pushed by Trotter because of his ability to be so smart with what he sees and how instinctual he is.
We saw it with Jordan Brooks. I mean, if they identify a guy at that position they like, they'll take him earlier than other people think they will. And I don't think this is too early for Trotter anyway. Let's do it.
Okay. So let's see how this board runs now. This will be interesting. There's your D-line run.
Next guy. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, Peyton Wilson went to the 49ers. Like, they need more linebacker help.
Right.
All right, so let's look at our board now. So we've addressed linebackers, one of the biggest needs. We can kind of turn the page on that for a little bit. Now that we're getting into this part of the draft, we got to look hard at the lines, right?
Yeah.
We can't wait too long. I mean, there's no way Christian Haynes is still going to be there in the middle of the 3rd round, is he? If he is, this is a no-brainer for me.
Yeah.
If he's there, you got to take him, right? I mean, I agree too.
Your defensive line, you're down to Tyler Davis. There's McKinley Jackson, who the Seahawks met with, but he might still be there at your early 4.
Can we just have a look at a receiver? This is something that like Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son. Like you were talking earlier about a situation. Imagine Brendan Rice suiting up for the Seahawks instead of the lovely 49ers.
Well, Jalen McMillan, I've taken in many mocks in the 3rd, 4th round. Obviously, the connection there with Ryan Grubb, and he's a guy that I've seen a lot of buzz lately from scouting circles saying they're sleeping on him. This is a guy that should be rated higher in this class.
I think he's being slept on because of the COVID year he had with Dylan Morris at quarterback, who couldn't really get him the ball down the field as well, and his injury history that he had this year with his knee. He couldn't get going enough consistently, I think, to give enough film. I think 3rd round here.
I'd be down for. I think this is about the place in this draft where they would kind of go off script a little bit and go for a weapon because they have 3/4 coming up. They have the second one. They get to sleep on it. They have the second pick in the draft basically on day 3, right? And knowing that there's going to be some D-line, offensive line depth with those 3 picks in the 4th round. I like the idea. I've been telling people for months that, hey, they're going to take a receiver at some point in this draft, probably earlier than you think they should. And a guy like, to me, the guy that, as much as I talked about Luke McCaffrey earlier,
Jalen McMillan.
I mean, he's a guy that can play inside and out. I think he'd be a really nice compliment to JSN and DK, and just a really, really skilled guy. And he also has some return experience, right? And we talked about the kickoff return.
The other thing I look at with Jalen McMillan is when I watched him initially at Washington, because I'm a big Huskies fan, he reminds me of Tyler before the leg break. Because before Tyler broke his leg, he could maneuver and run and do all those things. I remember Tyler's rookie year and thinking of like when Russ dropped the snap in Minnesota and flicked it to him and he maneuvered his way down the field.
Yeah.
That's what I look at with Jalen McMillan is he gives you that weapon where now JSN isn't predominantly a slot guy. He can bump out.
Yeah.
And we can run a guy on the inside that's going to be just as effective on the inside, but is going to be more of a yak guy inside for us. I think you take Jalen McMillan here, honestly, because I don't think you're going to get that level and skill set later on.
It's going to drop off pretty significantly here. That the rest of that next tier of receivers is going to go pretty quick. And the thing I like McMillan too, somebody, I saw some stuff on Twitter the other day that somebody put a little reel together that for a guy who's, 6'1", 192, there's tons of 50-50 balls and contested catches that he's winning at the catch point all over his tape. Let's go Jalen McMillan here. And then we go to, so let me ask you this, Ryan.
Yeah.
You're going to bed at the end of day 2. You've picked up an extra pick. So we have 3 players now. And right now we only have 2. If you're Joe Fan out there, and I guess I don't mean Joe Fan who used to cover the Seahawks for NBC here. I mean, as in John Doe, right? Joe, normal fan, typical fan. You're going to bed after day 2 and you've got Cooper DeJean, you've got a linebacker, and then you went receiver in the 3rd, kind of like I talked about last year where they didn't have any defensive linemen going into day 3. You're still a little bit nervous about that position group and offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Joe Schmo, I mean, I don't.
Twitter would be going nuts about
Twitter
the
would be going nuts. I mean, especially the Jalen McMillan pick. I mean, and again, I love him. And I agree. I think we will take a receiver. Is it that high? I mean, like Bryce mentioned, it starts falling off if you wait too long. If receivers sort of, something that you really want to look at, get another weapon in there, cheaper. Obviously, you got another rookie receiver with him and JSN. So if I'm going to bed, and I'm Joe Schmo, I'm going crazy on Twitter because we don't have anything on the line, and that's been the narrative of we have to clean it up on the line, interior wise, all this kind of stuff. But I think like people just got to remember this. We're not winning the Super Bowl. Accumulate as much good players, blue chip guys, weapons. And I think that's sort of what you got to realize. I mean, listen, you bring in an interior offensive line. The line's not magic. It takes time.
Yeah.
To develop a line and get everybody working together. There's no guarantee you take a guy as early as we took, say, DeJean, and it's just going to be what you think it is. Whereas a guy like Cooper DeJean, it's more of okay, this guy can be a blue chip guy. There's more of a chance of that happening, and then you can bring that into 2025, just like you did with Witherspoon and those pieces. And then same with the offensive side of the ball. With Jalen McMillan, it's like here's another young receiver now with JSN, right? Because we know Tyler's probably has a year left, and then let's go, and then we will. But yeah, so if I'm Joe Schmo, the quick answer is you're gonna be reading a lot of like hate or whatever you want to call it. But for us, you look at it and it's like that. I would be super stoked if this was the first 3 guys.
Let me throw a scenario at you. And this is what I like about having 4-2. Like I said, you go to bed, you have the second pick on the last day of the draft. You're taking phone calls. You have a clear picture of the board. You get to sit, have your meetings, post day 2, plan it out. and then you get to do something cool. So you have 3 picks coming up: 4-2, 4-18, 4-23. There's still a bunch of interior offensive line depth there. Look at this: Christian Mahogany,
Totally.
Javian Cohen, Tanner Bartolini, who has played some guard. I wasn't sure about that when I saw him at the combine. There's Mason McCormick still, Leighton Robinson, you mentioned, Trevor Keegan, who they've met with. There's your Brandon Coleman. Like, there's a lot of depth here, right?
Totally.
Even on the defensive line, there's your McKinley Jackson, who they met with. Gabe Hall, who Jim Nagy was just talking up the other day. Keith Randolph has been a top 30 visit. So there's some cool stuff there, right? And look who's sitting here. Look who's sitting here as their 96th round.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think he lasts until the 4th round.
No, I agree.
But in this scenario, if it's not,
Right.
and you can, this is what I tell people all the time when I do these mocks too. If rather than get upset because you think I took a player that from the simulator that wouldn't normally be there. Okay. We spent a lot of time talking about Michael Pratt earlier today. So if you don't think Rattler's going to be there when we are finished with this exercise, just plug in Michael Pratt there. The philosophy is the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But if he does fall this far because of questions about his size, right? That article I talked about today, numerous scouts just talking about how little he is.
Right.
Questions about his decision-making, questions about his maturity when he was younger. Quarterbacks do slip. Sam Howell went in the 5th round. He was expected to go in the 2nd or 3rd. This is where they pounce, right? And finally take a quarterback.
I think so. I think this is where, if Michael Pratt's on the board, in reality, this is where you see Michael Pratt go. It's one of these first 2 picks in the 4th round here. Given the fact that Spencer,
see where he went. They had him going.
Where did Pratt go?
Okay.
Yeah.
Did I lose out on my guy?
Because he's not there.
I lost out on Michael Pratt. Where did he? Oh, there he is. Okay.
Giants. That makes
This is what else. This is what I will say.
3rd
about
round
this.
makes all the sense in the world. I've actually seen some Daniel Jones kind of comps to him a little bit.
So I have 2 comps for him, which I think will shock some people after watching his film. I see as a starter, at least, his floor is a more athletic Matt Hasselbeck.
I wondered if you were going to say that name.
That's who, for me, when I watch him play, that's who I see. His ceiling, though, mechanically, if he gets a few things worked out with the way he can spin it, he has a low or a poor man's Joe Burrow vibe a little bit.
Okay.
Because Joe Burrow didn't have a killer arm coming out of college. He still doesn't to this day in the NFL. He's got a good arm, but not something that you write home about. But his accuracy, his decision-making, his leadership are the things that make Joe Burrow who he is. That's why, for me, I look at Michael Pratt and say, if your floor is a more athletic Matt Hasselbeck, well, he started for 10 plus years in Seattle, and did quite well. I think here, based on who's after us, I don't see, maybe the Jets take a quarterback or the Raiders, maybe the Jets or the Jaguars, I should say, as a backup potential for Lawrence. We could get away with not taking Rattler and see how the board falls. Jordan Travis is still there. There was one player that I did see, though, that I really liked and fits our O-line is Zach Zinter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so. Where do they have him rated?
He is an O tackle, I think.
Yeah, but I think you could.
They have him as their 101st tackle.
Yeah, well, the injury, the leg injury. I mean, I could see you still being able to get that guy. I think the chances of you getting him at 18th pick in the 4th over Rattler is a better chance that I think Zach's still there.
Let's do this. Let's take Rattler, but fully acknowledging that it likely wouldn't.
That he won't be in the 4th,
right?
Yeah.
But could be Michael Pratt instead.
Yep.
Like this seems like the range where, for all the talking we're doing about them taking a quarterback at some point, they're going to.
Yep.
That this would make a lot of sense. And you can nitpick the name, but just consider the position.
Oh, wow. Patriots took your guy there, Dan.
Who is it?
Luke McCaffrey.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And there you go. Zach Zinter went to
we missed out on Zinter.
Oh, so he just went. He went 14. Yeah.
Well, let's see what's left on the interior offensive line then, because we don't want to miss out on too many of these guys.
Right.
Mason McCormick.
I would take
Brandon. There's your guy, Brandon Coleman.
Yeah, which I still find interesting. He's ranked so low on this, considering if you watch his tape, I think he's a phenomenal guy.
Yeah.
I think you might go with if you go back up there, Dan, to the top. I think it's Tanner there from Wisconsin.
Bortolini. He's
Bortolini.
so athletic. Let's see if Mock Draftable has all of his explosion testing on there. Look at that 90th percentile vertical jump, broad jump, 96
40-yard dash.
40-yard dash. Really moves
And
well. Played center at Wisconsin, but also has played guard earlier in his career. Here's some of his pro comps. Jarrett Kingston also coming out in this draft. Scott Quisenberry.
Connor Williams.
Yeah.
I look at it and I go, if you look at what Ryan Grubb did at Washington, his interior guards have to be able to move. And that's why I still find the Lincoln Tomlinson signing interesting,
right?
Because he does like his screen game. He does like it a lot, especially with Charbonnet, McIntosh, Ken Walker. Like, if you get those guys in space behind a couple of guys, they can sure do some damage. That's why, for me, a guy that is that high on that side of the spectrum with his athletic ability, I think you can't miss. And he doesn't necessarily have to start right away.
I like it a lot because, typically I take the same 3 or 4, guards in my mock drafts. I like the Bartolini pick because he can play center. So you're hedged if Olu isn't a fit, but he can play guard, and he does give you that more mobile guy where you have Bradford and now Tomlinson, who are more kind of that big mauling type, even though Tomlinson is surprisingly effective in outside zone. Let's do it. Let's go Bortolini here. You good with that, Ryan?
Yeah, I like it. I just think you got to address it right now.
And then we're going to go skip to our 3rd, 4th round pick. Like some of the value here. Let's do this. Let's look at defensive line. McKinley Jackson is still there. 6'2",
so is Wingo too, who's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
One of the only true, real kind of nose tackles in this draft. Is Christian Boyd still on the board? Let's see, because I know the Seahawks have met with him.
Yep,
he is. Dominated the Shrine game. Smaller school guy. Let's look at the overall board. Just see if someone has kind of slipped. At some point, they're going to draft, or they're going to address running back with Bryant Koback retiring. But they got to go defensive line, right?
I don't know. I think what's the safety room look like?
Yeah, I was just thinking that too.
Like, if I look at this,
Sione Vaki, Dadrian Taylor Demerson, Ketan Oladapo is a guy that, based on everything I've been hearing lately, I don't think he's still there in the 4th round. Out of Oregon State. There's some interesting dudes here. If you're seeing Cooper DeJean as a slot guy,
it's a universal safety slot guy. Yeah, you need still a true safety that you're not necessarily moving with those 3. Like, realistically, we could look at next year in 2025, and they go, okay, cool. We've got Cooper who can move around, but right now he's penciled in as one of our starting safeties. Jarek Reed's another name that's still on our roster, and so is Jonathan Sutherland.
Yep,
but
Kobe Bryant.
I don't know. Like, for me, I think they might still address a pure safety in this. But looking at that remaining list, I still think there's guys that we can get, even though we're going to be sitting a whole round now. So we're going to go from 423 to 6.
A couple of those guys are going to be there in the 6th, and where they're sitting with 3 picks.
That's why I'm thinking that we can get away with, we can still get Brandon Coleman in the 6th and, an interior O-line or whatnot.
We haven't addressed the front 5 at all. So here's a combination of defensive linemen and edge players. Mohamed Kamara is a guy that's really interesting that I think Dane Brugler had him in his full Seahawk mock the other day. A guy that I hadn't really thought about just because he's undersized, but he's so explosive and so productive.
But here's my question, Dan. Does he set the edge? Yeah.
That we don't know. Are any of our guys here? Braden McGregor's there. Is Brennan Jackson still here?
Yeah, he is right there, 207.
Yeah.
There are a couple of those interior guys. There's Christian Boyd, McKinley Jackson, who we've talked about.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
I think I think it's a position where we should address it. Obviously we talked about, okay, you got guys that you still have to evaluate from last season, but I think it'd be foolish not to take, because we're jumping all the way back or we're not picking till the 6th, and then I think we can look at the safety room then. So I think, Bryce, I don't know your opinion, who you like here, but I think this is the pick we address D-line here.
So here's my thought process between the D-line interior and the edge. I think we're better to go edge here than we are to go true D-line interior. Because the other thing we got to remember with what John Schneider, look at Brian Monet. If he hadn't blown out his knee, Brian Monet's still on this roster. They do have Hankins, who they signed this year. You can get a big mauling guy usually to play that nose in UDFA, which John Schneider is phenomenal at doing.
I think that's why they were looking at a guy like Randolph. Yeah,
right, exactly. Someone that you can get in UDFA or super late that'll still be there. I think this is Brennan Jackson.
Or he seems to be getting into this range now where he's got some buzz and he's got some guys saying, hey, he's going to come A+ character, incredible speed. You look at his explosion numbers at his size. He's got some moves, but still, I think raw, can use some coaching up. But I said it earlier, I'm a sucker for motor, and you never have to worry about this guy not giving all out effort all the time.
The other thing, Dan, I like about him is you could bump him inside too because of his size. 6'4", 264.
I always felt like he could carry another 10, 15 if you wanted him to.
Right. So you'd have another kind of freaky Mike Morris type of guy, which Mike McDaniel has proven he's been able to use those. Instead of going with a guy like Kamara that's a little undersized,
right?
Go with a guy that you can add 10 pounds to at the next level that still could be, slide him up and down that line. That's one thing Mike McDonald said. I want to feel like there's 11, 12, 13 guys on the field. I think Brennan Jackson gives that. And people may not agree with this spot that we're taking him in, but I don't think he's there come pick sixth round, third pick in the 6th round. I think he's gone.
This is right in the range that he's going to end up going based on all the kind of the current buzz. So let's go Brennan Jackson here. We address edge. And again, just our process, knowing that, those interior guys that they're kind of looking to add to that defensive line group are probably going to be there a little bit later on. Now we're jumping down to the 6th round where we're going to have 3 picks now because we got that one extra one, I think, in the second trade back we did earlier, right? With Houston. That's right. Look at all those picks go by. Okay, let's look at the overall board. Well, first we wanted to check. Let's just see the overall first of all.
Oh, Trevor Keegan's still there. So is Andrew Ram.
Let's see. Yeah, let's look at tackle and interior offensive line. Keegan's the guy they met with. I think he's played some guard and tackle at Michigan. Kind of played all up and down that line.
My guy's still there.
I keep seeing this. It's hard to imagine that would happen.
I don't think he's there. I think he's gone in the 5th round at the latest now.
Garrett Greenfield's really interesting to me because he played a ton of tackle, lots of experience at South Dakota State. Look at these athletic numbers. I hadn't heard of him when the combine came around, but 99th percentile for vertical jump and broad jump. And there is some sentiment among scouts that even though he's 6'6", 305, similar in some respects to Roger Rosengarten, a guy that they think could play some guard later on. There's no way Brandon Coleman's going to last this long. Ladarius Henderson is another guy that kind of became the forgotten guy on that offensive line at Michigan last year. Played a bunch of left tackle, came in at right tackle when there were some injuries last year, has also played some guard. Another Michigan guy. All the Michigan guys outside of Zach Carson Barnhart is another guy. I think the Seahawks met with him at the combine.
I'm either going Brandon Coleman or Trevor Keegan here.
Should we do Keegan because he's more realistic?
I think so because it's more realistic. I don't think Coleman's there.
He's a guy that can play guard and tackle, familiarity with Harbaugh and McDonald, and they met with him.
There you go.
I agree. Yeah.
Boom. And it just makes sense that they would double up at offensive line in this draft.
Okay, so what does the tight end room look like right now?
That's what's at the top of the board right now. Tip Ryman.
Yep.
The biggest tight end not big, Brevin Spanford right behind him, 6'7", 270, but the most physical of the tight ends that are left anyway, 6'5", 270. Didn't look like a real natural hands catcher to me running receiver drills at the combine, but a guy that's a nasty in the run game. Let's look at the rest of this group. Anyone else fall? Tanner McLaughlin.
AJ Barner.
I like that McLaughlin kid.
Is McLaughlin's a little bit more of a move tight end guy, right? More of a receiving tight end.
Yeah. And so you look at that and So you maybe don't go there, but yeah, he is.
I look at AJ Barner and I see in my opinion at least, there's the two Husky guys, which I think they could both be UDFAs, especially Westover. I think he might be a UDFA.
Mm-hmm.
What I look at with Barner is I see Will Dissly, but more athletic. Okay. That's what I see with AJ Barner there as tight end. But so I'm just looking at our board. So we've got edge, interior line. What does the D-line room look like almost at this point? Because there's only two teams between us and our next pick.
Right. Jordan Jefferson, Jaden Crumity. There's Christian Boyd still. Logan
Miles Murphy's an interesting one too.
Miles Murphy. Would give him a second chance to draft a Miles Murphy after a lot of people thought they should have taken the Clemson one last year. Fabian Lovett's interesting. Jawan Briggs is a guy they had in for a 30 visit out of Cincinnati. I kind of like your tight end idea. They're going at some point, right?
I'll let you two decide who you want. I'm up for either Ryman or Barner.
I think I could see Ryman appealing to them because he's so physical and he's so capable in the run game. Maybe even a guy that could contribute as a rookie in that role. But I think there's some upside there that hasn't been tapped into. He just, really wasn't a big part of the offense there in the passing game in Illinois. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I agree. I think we go somebody more like that at the tight end spot. So I think we stick there and we pick him.
Cool. And if all else fails, put 35 more pounds on him and do the George Fant thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There you go.
And then we just go 2 more picks down. And I want to do one thing. I wouldn't be shocked if they double dip at linebacker.
And the guy at the top of your board there is someone I really like.
Seahawks have had him in for a visit. He's been to Seattle. He's the biggest linebacker in this draft, probably 6'2", 245. One of the only guys in this draft that really projects as a true Mike. He was defensive player of the year in the SEC. People just are shocked when they hear that. Really, really productive. And when Mike McDonald said a couple of years ago, if you're going to blitz for me, you have to get home. This is the guy that I thought of. And I think he would pair well with Trotter. I mean, you could conceivably have your Mike and Will long-term beyond this year on rookie contracts. I think Watson is even a guy that can come in some sub packages and kind of come off the edge for you.
I think so too. He's the guy that I really like later in the rounds. I think you can get.
Let's do it.
All right.
And then we dropped to our last pick in the 7th round, and this is where we're probably going to be looking to D-line, right? See if we can get one of those guys. We're on the phones. We're trying to get undrafted free agents, but maybe some of their agents are steering them elsewhere because they think we have too much depth here, and we lost. A bunch of those guys came off let's go to that position group.
Miles Murphy's still there.
Logan Lee had a conversation earlier this week with Shane Hallam, who had him in his full 7-round mock draft. Interesting athletic profile there. Fabian Lovett, Jawan Briggs, who the Seahawks met with. You take your pick here. The way I do my process, I might go Briggs here because they've met with him and they know him. But if you want to plug in one of these other guys, you sure can too.
So I've got one little caveat. What's the running back room look like right now?
Right. Same idea. It really, really good point where it might be hard for them to recruit undrafted guys because they're going to look at that running back room and go, where are my opportunities?
Where's my playing time?
Come on.
If I'm looking for a guy, I want a guy that's a 3rd down back that can push Kenny McIntosh.
I love Kamani Vidal, nation's leading rusher last year. Shifty, but also can hit the home run. Let's see. So here's a guy, George Halani. I don't know if he fits that 3rd down role you're talking about. I don't know what his pass protection is like. I just know that Seahawks had him in for a visit. He's the only running back, I think, that had a 30 visit.
Yep.
And Griffin Sturgeon just said, tweeted something today about how he fits the mold of the type of running backs that they typically like.
And we got to remember the running back, the whole thing with offense and what that looks like now will be different than what Pete wanted when he was the head coach in that say. Grubb may want totally different guys. And if you look at our running back room, we I think he might be the fit because he kind of reminds me of Dylan Johnson, who he's already had in.
Yeah. 5'11", 210, and good explosion numbers, 92nd percentile in vertical jump, 93rd percentile broad jump, strong dude, 40-yard dashes, 66th percentile, but he's more of a physical back. It's just, I'm not as familiar with this guy's game. If they had him in for a visit, I would imagine they like his ability to be in that role that you're talking about, because that's really going to be the only thing available.
Yeah.
Let's do it because it makes a lot of sense for the reasons we talk about. It's going to be hard for them to attract the best UDFA running backs because of that room. All right, let's finish this up.
All right.
In the first round at 22 after trading back, Cooper DeJean, safety, cornerback, Swiss Army knife, Iowa. 227, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., weak side linebacker, Clemson. 317, Jalen McMillan, wide receiver, Washington. 4-2, Spencer Rattler, quarterback, South Carolina. 418, Tanner Bartolini, center guard, Wisconsin. 423, Brennan Jackson, edge, Washington State. 6'3", Trevor Keegan, interior offensive lineman, although we can play some tackle as well, Michigan. 6'13", Tip Ryman, tight end, Illinois. 6'16", another linebacker, Nathaniel Watson, Mississippi. 7'15", George Halani, running back, Boise State. Guys, what do you think?
I really like this draft, actually. If Seattle walked out with something like this, and like we said, you can sub out Spencer Rattler for Michael Prater and Jordan Travis there.
Yeah. Joe Milton has his fans who take your pick.
That too. I would be, if I look at this, I'm going, okay, they're putting pieces in place for next year's draft to add a couple of guys, and then they should be off to the races.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is a great looking draft. I mean, the top three guys right there, DeJean and Trotter and McMillan. I mean, you're just potential really good players, and just to roll that into 25, and then like you said, you can flip flop it, but Spencer Rattler, if he's in the fourth round, I mean, that's a no brainer. Now you got a potential quarterback. You just really, and we doubled up an interior offensive line. So, I mean, you'd be really happy with a draft like this. And then the fact that you picked up a couple more picks by trading down, and you still got a player like Cooper DeJean. I mean, yeah, for me, this would look really, really nice.
The thing I like about this is the way that it falls with the value in the draft. If you go DeJean first, it just works. Where some of those other guys, if we had taken a defensive lineman early, I think you miss out on some other value. Certainly, if you went offensive guard early, I think you really miss out on some of these other opportunities. It's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the other thing.
Bryce, anything you think is missing that you think that you?
Well, I think everyone's going to scream that we didn't address D-line, right? Like interior D-line.
Yeah,
we got to forget in between Cooper DeJean and Jeremiah Trotter, there's this guy that we got last year in Leonard Williams. He is theoretically our second round pick.
Yeah, he should be on this list, right? Sam Howell and Leonard Williams should also
are in this list. So we've got two quarterbacks, and we've got another D lineman in there. That's so that's what people have to understand when we insert those guys into this draft. That even makes this draft look a little bit different because Leonard Williams is going to be better than in that gap area. Who are we going to get that's going to come in and have the protection of a Leonard Williams potentially in that second round, right? Those are some guys that I would look at and go, who's here, who's not.
And there were some guys on that list that we considered in the seventh round, interior defensive linemen, just like you said earlier, that, tend to slip through because they're one-dimensional or just run stuffers, gap stuffers, guys like that, and guys like Brian Monet, that they'd probably be able to bring a couple of those guys in. Juwan Briggs, the draft shut off after we finalized it. He probably wasn't drafted if he's a guy they were looking at. You can find those guys. And there's still, I liked what I saw from Matt Gotel in the last couple of games last year when he got some reps, especially down in Arizona. And he's still on the roster. He's a guy that they've kept around. I think he could fit that role. So no, I dig this one, you guys. I think this one's good. Took us a while to get there. I think it might have looked a little differently if we had the clock on us.
Oh yeah.
But hey, this was a long episode, but it was time well spent. You guys, I really appreciate it. I love what you guys are doing with the podcast, and we need to get you some more subscribers and viewers because Seahawks fans are missing out. There's a lot of good Seahawks content out there, a lot of good content creators, and you guys are kind of the new kids on the block, but you're killing it. And really want to try and get as much support and as many eyeballs on you as I can. Do you guys have anything planned between now and the draft?
Yeah, we first of all, Dan, really appreciate you having us on the show, and just can't say enough. We really enjoyed it. And yeah, we have a lot. We're gonna go live in the second day 2. We're gonna be live, and so we're gonna have some live reactions
Awesome.
with Bryce and myself, and then we'll right after that, after the draft, we're gonna definitely get a nice draft recap episode for everybody and breaking it all down and comparing maybe some of the guys obviously we thought through some of the mocks and what they actually do. So that's kind of the couple things we got coming up in the near future here.
Nice. That's great to know. I am going to live stream the first round. So now knowing you guys are going to do day 2, that's
awesome.
Cool. So now my viewers can plan on doing that as well. And I'll make sure to remind them on that day too. So make sure and follow these guys on Twitter too, so that you always know what they're doing and what's coming up. Thanks so much, guys. We'll be talking in DMs, I'm sure, throughout the week and what happens in the draft. And thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
All right. Be sure to join me Thursday. I will, as I mentioned in the show, live stream reaction throughout the entire draft. So wherever you're watching the draft, you can also tune in on your phone or laptop or whatever. Join in with me and we can discuss, debate, predict, analyze, not just the Seahawks pick and what we think it might be as it gets closer, but also what other teams around the league are doing, especially around the NFC West. Tomorrow, Curtis Allen, you've read his stuff probably on the Seahawks Draft blog, Rob Staten's website. He's going to be joining me tomorrow. And got a couple of things up my sleeve this week as well, including it's been delayed a couple of times, been promising it for about a week now, but the viewer mock draft episode will happen either Tuesday or Wednesday. And then I'll do my final mock draft, Seahawks full 7-round mock, and I will take a shot at predicting how I think the first round will go in whole. So all that coming up, busy week on the show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any of it. And as always, follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Forever and always go Hawks. Thanks for watching, you guys.